Hello everyone. So a couple weeks ago, I had come across an article that I thought had a pretty interesting title. It had something to do with a disease that was infecting deer and giving them these zombie-like symptoms. So I found it pretty interesting. I've had a background in hunting before, and just the fact that deer are roaming around every day right around here, right around our campus. I wanted to take this presentation as like an opportunity to research a little further into what's actually going on with these deer. So what I had learned is that they're not actually turning into zombies that you see on The Walking Dead and things like that, but they're actually just contracting a disease known as chronic wasting disease. So chronic wasting disease was first identified in Fort Collins, Colorado in 1967. At a wildlife research facility, they had mule deer in captivity, and they had noticed one of their mule deer was displaying zombie-like symptoms. So they had monitored that animal and then started to keep track of other animals that were displaying the same symptoms. What they had found is that every animal displaying these symptoms of this CWD was that they were all passing away from the infection. So in 1978, they had classified CWD as a TSE, and I'll get more into what exactly a TSE is a little later in the presentation. So chronic wasting disease affects hooved animals. An umbrella term for them would be the cervids, and especially in North America, it affects animals like white-tailed deer, mule deer, moose, and elk. But since the discovery of this disease in 1967, it has since spread through 25 states in the United States, 2 Canadian provinces, South Korea, Finland, and Norway. As it spread to these different countries, it also spread to a few different types of deer, like sika deer and reindeer. When trying to identify if an animal has the disease, it can be kind of challenging because the signs and symptoms don't develop right away. It can be multiple years before any signs or symptoms show up in the animal. When it does finally start displaying these symptoms, it can have a multitude of different types between just a change in behavior to a change in their physical appearance. So some of these physical appearances or physical changes in appearance consist of a extreme weight loss, which is kind of like the wasting part of the chronic waste disease. So and that pretty much just is when the animal loses an extreme amount of weight. They turn into skin and bone and eventually just unable to support their own body weight and die. And then also they experience a lack of coordination as well as stumbling, and through this, like a telltale sign that they're struggling with their coordination is that they will have a very low and wide stance, just kind of trying to support themselves and stay upright. From here, they also typically will have a excessive bodily fluid loss. So either through drooling or excessive urination, these animals will typically also have a constant thirst because of all the fluid that they are losing. And then as you get into the behavioral changes, some animals can display a higher level of aggressiveness than they normally would if you were to come across them, and it can actually affect them to the point where they have very little to no fear of humans, and this is shown in like in the later stages of the disease when the animals are kind of just completely unaware of their surroundings and just very confused altogether. An example of this is, these animals will kind of, I mean, they could be right next to a human and they'll stand there just frozen and won't move. So that's just an example of that. So this is a video that was made by the CWD Alliance, and they're just an organization that deals specifically with the CWD research.
Hello, I'm David Wesley, and I'm here as a wildlife biologist and as a fellow hunter and a conservationist to share with you some facts and concerns associated with chronic wasting disease. This malady is known on the street in hunter circles simply as CWD. CWD is a contagious neurological disease of mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, and moose that produces small holes in the brains of the affected animals. CWD is similar to mad cow disease in cattle and stray meat in sheep. Fortunately, unlike mad cow disease, there is no evidence that CWD can be transferred to humans. My first personal experience with CWD occurred when I was a doctoral student at Colorado State University some 35 years ago. At the research facility where I was doing work on pronghorn antelope, the mule deer in the neighboring pen began to show some really peculiar symptoms. They were staggering and drooling. They showed signs of extreme thirst. Their ears drooped and their coats were rough. They maintained an unusually wide stance and were generally lethargic and listless. They went off feed and seemed, in general, to be just wasting away until they finally died. Little did I know at the time that I was witnessing the first documented case of CWD, a disease that was officially diagnosed some 10 years later thanks to the research efforts of people like Beth Williams. Let's listen to what Beth has to say on the subject.
There's no evidence that chronic wasting disease is transmissible to people, and that's based on epidemiologic investigations that have been done by the public health agencies and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they've been investigating chronic wasting disease and looking at the areas where CWD occurs, and they don't see any link between CWD and any disease that occurs in people. But you have to understand that just because we don't have any evidence doesn't mean that it's impossible for that to happen. And so because of that, recommendations are that people be prudent in how they handle chronic wasting disease, and where they hunt. If they hunt in areas where chronic wasting disease occurs, they can take some simple precautions like avoiding hunting animals or harvesting animals that are in poor body condition or don't look like they're acting normally. They can also have their animals tested. They can avoid contact with the brain and spinal cord, which is where the highest titer of the agent occurs. So there's some really easy kind of common sense things that can be done to reduce risk that we don't even know that there's a risk, but it pays to be prudent, I think.
Today, CWD is a significant wildlife management issue that has impacted hunters, wildlife agencies, and hunting regulations. This is exactly why it is our objective to provide you with the information, knowledge, and skill to feel confident and enjoy your hunt, even in a CWD area.
So now that you've had a little bit of background on what exactly CWD does and how it affects the animal, I'm going to talk about the class of diseases that CWD falls into and how these work. So CWD is a form of transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, and it can also be referred to as a prions disease. And essentially, like they mentioned in the video, it creates tiny holes in the brain, giving it a spongy appearance. So some of these other TSEs or prions diseases are variant Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which can be found in humans, the mad cow disease or bovine spongiform encephalopathy in cows, and then the Scrapes disease in sheep or goats. So within all of these TSEs, they're all derived from a problem with prion proteins. Prion proteins are made from a PRMP gene, and from there they are actively used in the brain and other tissues throughout the body, but mainly the brain and the spinal cord. Up to this point, we really don't know what their main function is and what significance they have, but researchers speculate that they have something to do with with a role in transporting copper to different cells in the body. Another way that they might function is as protection for the brain from different types of injuries. So within these TSEs, when an animal is infected, they're actually not infected with a virus or a parasite from some external source. It's really just from a single mutation in one of these prion proteins. As these prion proteins become mutated, they grow and spread, and as they kind of attach to areas surrounding these normal prion proteins, they directly damage those proteins, and those are what create the holes in the brain. So that was kind of like the biology of how an individual is affected by the TSC or the CWD. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the disease is spread from individual to individual. So with CWD, it's spread, it can be spread directly or indirectly, and if it's spread indirectly, it can be spread through contaminated water source, food source, or soil. When these animals are living in large groups or herds, it's very easy for this disease to spread from animal to animal, especially due to the fact that they are sharing these food, water sources, and as well as just the land that they're living on. The scary part about this disease is because it's dormant and you really don't see any symptoms for a long time, it goes on for a while and it has a lot of opportunity to infect others, but even after the original carrier has deceased, it still has the potential to be contagious to animals in the surrounding area. So that carcass can still infect anything that comes into contact with it. So even though these wild animals, it's speculated that the wild animals and animals in captivity have kind of cross-contaminated to result in the spread of this disease as rapidly as it is. There's no current evidence, as I had mentioned, that humans can currently get the disease. So in the figure on the left, provided by the CDC, it was last updated in 2011, and in this reddish color are counties that had reported cases of CWD before the year 2000, and then in the yellow, those were counties that had reported the cases in 2000 up until 2011. And then on the figure on the left, those are all the counties that had reported cases within that 8-year span between 2011 and as recent as a month ago. So as you can see, it's spread drastically, very much north through the United States, as well as almost completely over to the East Coast. So with the rapid spread of this disease, it becomes more of an issue, more of a potential issue in the future that it could one day affect humans and be very prevalent in every area of the United States. Excuse me. So took a look at a couple different studies that have looked at the potential of humans being infected with the CWD. And the first study that I looked at was conducted by Dr. Stephanie Sub and her colleagues, and it was published in 2017 and was started in 2009. They used a monkey known as a macaque to, or in the study, because it's genetically similar to humans more so than another animal that we use in testing, like mice. So in the study, they either fed the monkey meat that had been infected with the CWD, or they had directly implanted the infected tissue directly into the brain of the monkey. And what they found in this study is that all of those monkeys had been infected and had died from the infection. So this raised a couple of red flags, and it started to almost look like a possibility that maybe humans could one day develop this. But then the next study, it's actually very similar to this one. It kind of completely contradicted what had come out of this previous study. So this one was done by Brent Race in 2018, and he had previously conducted a study about 13 years ago, or 14 years ago, that looked at squirrel monkeys as well as these macaque monkeys, and they had given their monkeys this infected tissue the same way as the previous study had, orally and intracerebrally. And they had determined that the squirrel monkeys had become infected and had a really high infection rate and died from this disease, while the macaques actually had not been affected at all and there was no infection rate. So with this kind of contradicting information, they had recently revisited their study and looked at the same euthanized monkeys from the previous study, and looked at them 13 years after they were originally inoculated with the infected tissue, and they had still seen that there was no evidence of the infection spreading throughout the body whatsoever. So, like I said, and as I've said many times before already, it doesn't appear that humans can currently get the disease, but the CDC does recommend that we do follow a couple of precautions to ensure that we are being safe around animals and around the area in which these animals could be infected. If you are hunting in an area where these animals can be present, it's recommended not to shoot or kill an animal that's acting strange or potentially sick. If you kill an animal in one of these areas, they recommend that you have the meat tested before consuming it. And then when you're handling the meat or field dressing an animal, they say that you should wear gloves and do not use kitchen or household knives or tools. And then obviously do not eat the infected meat. So all of these preventions were kind of, they recommend that we go through with all these preventative measures so that something like this disease does not happen. Variant Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease is actually a human form of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or the mad cow disease. And this is the way that scientists can see CWD affecting humans in the future. So in this case, this disease is contracted from a human eating beef from an infected cow. It's a very rare condition, but it affects 1 in a million people per year, and it's extremely serious. It's actually a form of dementia, and the different symptoms of this condition are memory loss, delayed neurological signs, and behavioral changes. And those symptoms pretty much lead up until the patient has become brain dead and then passes away. in this figure here, this displays a range of years from 1994 to 2015, and these are a representation of all of the cases that have been reported of this CJD in a multitude of different countries. And obviously, as you can see, it's become a very large problem, it was a very large problem in the United Kingdom. It's still affected a multitude of other places as well. Around 1999 and 2000, you can see that there's a peak, and then it starts to steadily decline, minus around 2004, where there's a peak. And I think that's mainly due to us kind of getting a better understanding of what exactly was going on, and then taking the preventative measures of testing the meat and having it run through quality checks before processing the meat and then distributing it to consumers to eat. So it's examples like these that are kind of it's a very good example of what could happen if CWD were to spread and start to infect humans. So it's very important that we kind of take this seriously and make sure that we go through all the preventative measures that were given to us. Thank you.
Did you see that, like, if any other animals can get this, like scavengers that feed off of deer after they die or things like that?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, it actually has not been pointed out in any scavengers. It's kind of only been exclusively in these cervids, as they call them, and then in the one study where it happened to infect the monkeys. So.
If you look at the map of where it was like transmitted from, why do you think it's so like obviously it's like a big part of where it started, but why do you think it's so scattered in other areas?
Right. It might have something to do with if an animal in captivity could have been potentially transported from one place to the other, and they didn't know at the time that it was expressing the infection. That's my understanding of it. It is very interesting, though, that there are so many different sections that are just kind of secluded around the country.
Do you know if they're working on a cure for CWD?
They actually, they had talked about it, and there is no current cure, and it did not seem like they were very far in that process at all. So.
Did they mention an average life expectancy once the symptoms started?
Not really. It kind of said that the symptoms, it could be, I think they said it could be up to 4 years before the symptoms start to show up, and then I'm assuming once those symptoms start to show up, it probably gets much worse from there on out, because the animal is obviously stressed by these conditions that it's being affected by. So.
Do you still hunt?
I didn't this season. I didn't the season before that.
The only reason I asked is I wondered if, it's common knowledge, if this is something that people that hunt regularly, if they would even know this, or if this is something that you just found through your research.
Yeah, so I had heard of it, but if before this, if you were to ask me what it was, I wouldn't be able to tell you. So I knew of it. I didn't know the severity of it in these